Beautiful. We are live. Good afternoon, everybody. To the thousands watching on Zoom, to the millions watching on YouTube. Welcome, everybody, to another Lunch and Learn. It is a joy and a privilege to have you all here today. This Lunch and Learn session, of course, is really only learn, because it is the 17th of Tammuz today, so it is a fast day. But it doesn't matter, because we can't eat anyway, because we're not together. We are still on Zoom. But welcome to everybody who's watching. A couple of words on this week's parasha, which is Parashat Pinchas. And for some people, they'll be able to actually hear Parashat Pinchas in person, please God, as we start to gingerly make our way back into shul. So that's a really nice thing. But for those of you not able to make it to shul, well, this week you will be reading about Pinchas. And Pinchas was a famous Jew. He was a zealot, and he had to deal with a very unfortunate situation in which somebody was engaging inappropriately with a Midianite, and he goes and he kills the both of them. And he's actually rewarded for this act of zealotry, whereas normally we would say murder is a bad thing. In this instance, it seems like it was given the thumbs up by Hashem. If you want to find out more about that, well, tough. That's not what we're going to be doing today. But that comes up in this week's parasha. We have another census, which takes up a bulk of this week's parasha as well, in which we count up the Jewish people. The numbers are not drastically different, mind you. But as we've said before, the reason why we repeat the census is because Hashem loves the Jewish people. And when you love something, you would happily count it over and over and over and over again, because of the joy that it gives you, but to be able to count things that are precious to you. We then have the episode of the daughters of Tzlafchad. Tzlafchad is an individual who came out of Egypt but died in the desert, and as a result of that, whereas he would have been deserved of having land in Israel allocated to him and his descendants, because he had 5 daughters, they were unsure what the procedure should be. And there was a concern that they were going to miss out, because the traditional understanding of the laws of inheritance would have excluded them having any plot, because inheritance should be transmitted through the male line, and there was no male, inheritors. So they go to Moshe and they say, this is really unfair. Why should we miss out now just because he had 5 girls? And he runs this by God, and in the end, the laws of inheritance are adapted to be able to ensure that their family, those 5 women, are able to nonetheless inherit land in the land of Israel. And the end of the parasha, or the end part of the parasha, we read through about Rosh Chodesh, about Pesach, about Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret. We read about all of those things, and those pieces of laning will be familiar to anyone who is familiar with pieces of laning, specifically from the Yomim Tovim. One very interesting thing, I can't share it with you because it's Shira's message in the newsletter. Never mind. If you want to hear the message that I was thinking of sharing with you today, you'll just have to read it in the newsletter, because it's the same message that Shira has put in there. Okay, so that's it for Parashat Pinchas. And now we will get cracking with Pirkei Avot. Now, I just want to take the opportunity for anybody who wasn't on last week, just to wish Mazal Tov to all of you guys, because we are 2 prakim, we are 2 chapters into Pirkei Avot, which is a really, really phenomenal achievement. And if we'd have been in person, we'd have probably bought an extra cake or something to celebrate. It's really, really special. We have been plowing through Pirkei Avot, these messages each week, and to have completed 2 chapters. I just want to congratulate everybody. Thank you all for being part of this journey. And without further ado, let's get underway with chapter 3, which is going to be coming up on your screen now. Please let me know if it's not there. Or please let me know if it is there. Give me a thumbs up, give me a wave, anything. It seems to be there. So here we go with chapter 3. Really exciting stuff. We are introduced to a rabbi called Akavia ben Mahalel. And everyone all right over there? So we're introduced to Akavia.
How many?
Yeah.
Rabbi, how many chapters in Pirkei Avot? How many?
There are 6 officially.
6.
We will be, please God, going through all 6 chapters.
Thank you.
You are welcome, Rita. Most welcome. Okay, so we're introduced to a guy called Akavia ben Mahalel. Now he actually comes before, chronologically, the 5 rabbis that we had been reading about. He lived at the time of Hillel, towards the end of the Second Temple, and he therefore chronologically seems to be out of place. But what seems to have happened when it comes to the way in which these Mishnayot were compiled, so you may recall that we had been going through the chronology of the chain of transmission, and we'd reached a point where we encountered Hillel, and then instead of just continuing with the chain of transmission from Hillel, we kind of sidetracked a little bit, and we heard from all of the people that served as the Nasi, who served as a spiritual leader of the generation. So we went on to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and then from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, we went through a whole bunch of Mishnayot that were to do with his 5 students. Yeah, and that's what we spent a lot of time doing, hearing from those 5 students. And then the last chapter ended with Rabbi Tarfon, and the reason for that was because it linked with Rabbi Elazar, who was the last of the 5 students. So actually, this is still kind of going in order, just not the order that we might have thought would be the order that we go in. So you might ask, well, if this guy was so awesome, why did he never become a spiritual leader of the generation? And what it turns out is he had 4 halachic opinions, which the rabbis didn't agree with, but he refused to change his position. So even though he never necessarily practiced according to the 4 opinions in those cases, he felt like it would be inappropriate for him to back down and change his ruling. And so by doing that, he basically said he decided to forego positions of power so that he wouldn't have to back down on his position. Now, these were not halachic areas which are tremendously problematic. It's not like this guy was flying off the handle or some kind of maverick cowboy. But he had an opinion. It was backed by sources, but it wasn't the way that the majority ruled. So he decided not to back down on that, but in so doing, he sacrificed, as it were, positions of power. All right, so that's a little bit about Akavia ben Mahalalel. So let's have a look at what he wants to say. So I'll read it through in the Hebrew, and then we'll have someone read it through in the English. Says the Mishnah, Akavia ben Mahalalel. Let's try one again. Take 3. Akavia ben Mahalalel Omer, Histakel b'shlosh dvarim, ve'i ata ba lidei aveira. Da me'ayin bata, ula'an ata holech, ve'lifnei mi ata atid liten din v'cheshbon. All right, so if someone wants to read that out for us in Egypt, if someone wants to read that for us in English, that'll be very great. I'll be back in just a second.
Hillel said, mark well 3 things and you'll not come into power of sin. know from where you come and where you are going, before whom you are destined to give an account and reckoning. Can I carry on? From where do
No,
you
because I'm going to jump back in with the Hebrew. מאין באת מטיפה סרוחה ולאן אתה הולך? למקום עפר רימה ותולע. ולפני מי אתה עתיד ליתן דין וחשבון לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. Take it away.
From where do you come? From a putrid drop. Where are you going? To a place of dust, of wormwood and maggot. Before whom are you destined to give an account and reckoning? Before the King of the Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He.
Thank you very much. So take a moment to have a look at that, and then let's see what you guys think. Consider three things, and you will never come to the power to come. Will never not come into the power of sin. Okay, that's one way of translating it. And those things are know from where you come, to know where you are going, and to know before whom you are destined to give an account. Am I interrupting someone? Oh, hello. Who's...
Putrid, it's horrible, messy. I think it's just referring to conception, that's all. He says you come from nothing, you're going to go to nothing other than your soul is going before Hashem, and you're going to have to account for everything you do. But just realise the miracle of your birth, I think. And your body goes to dust and ashes, food for the insects.
Okie doke. What do we think about that? Are we? How's it sitting with us, ladies and gentlemen?
A bit strong, isn't it, Rabbi?
It's not very, it doesn't sound very encouraging.
Oh, very good.
Well, I think it's, you're going to have to give a reckoning of your behaviour to Hashem. So the rest is how you behave, I suppose. If you knew that absolutely, if you were 100% sure you have to account for your deeds, and I suppose none of us would ever do anything that was unacceptable to others or to Hashem, I suppose. That's what he's saying, isn't it? Because if you had the absolute certainty of being found out.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to chime in at all?
The interesting one is know from where you come.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what exactly does that mean?
You come from nothing.
For me, it means you've got to, in order to know how you're going to move on in life, you've got to know where you come as your background, your tradition, your history, what you've been taught. And if you keep to that, then that will determine how you will go forward. So if you've got that history and that knowledge and that belief in what's right and etc. with you, then you use that to determine where you're going to go, because it's hard to move on unless you know where you've come from.
Yeah. So he's saying stay grounded.
Know that whatever you do to get there, you've got to give an account for it. And when it says, where do you come from a putrid drop, where are you going? I think that's a sort of an example that people come from, or you could come from nowhere, but you've still got to give your account and behave in a proper way. That's my interpretation for what it's worth.
Yeah, the word a putrid drop sort of is the difficult part here.
Yeah,
What you're saying is know your history, know your family background, where the Jewish people came from. It didn't need those four, from a putrid drop in there, did it?
Well, it's not much different from worms and maggots. It's all a bit. It's realistic, I suppose, but not going to spur you on too much.
Or it's saying you're coming from nothing, you're born and come from nothing.
Absolutely.
And then no matter what, you still are going to have to give an account of yourself, even at such a low, you are nothing. You'll have to give an account for yourself to God.
What's interesting is we seem to be in almost overwhelming agreement that this is a very deflating statement. Everyone seems to be saying, like, you're a piece of nothing, you're gonna be a piece of nothing. So yeah, go on, Claudia.
If we're supposed to be created in the image of God, then how comes it's written like this?
Very good. So before I answer that, I just want to try an experiment. All right, this may completely backfire, and being live in front of millions of people, this could be very embarrassing. But I just want everyone, please, and I realise we've got a couple of people off camera here, but if you are able to come on camera, please do so. It'd be great if everyone can just close their eyes. All right, close their eyes for a couple of seconds, and all I want you to do is point at you. Close your eyes and point at you. Okay, so open your eyes for a second and keep your fingers there. Some of you are pointing at your heads. Some of you are pointing at your chests. So pardon me?
The heart.
Yeah, you're pointing at your heart. Other people are pointing at their heads, that the seat of themselves is perhaps their brain. Would that be what you're indicating? So I've got in front of me a very interesting book. Aryeh Kaplan, the Aryeh Kaplan Reader, and he's got this bit, a whole chapter on immortality and the soul, right? So he says, point a finger at yourself, and what he says is, you will find that people will inevitably point at their hearts, or they will point at their heads. But then he goes through a little bit of a mental exercise, right? What if a person was to have a heart transplant, right? So now they've got a brand new heart inside their body. Does that mean that they're not them anymore? We wouldn't necessarily say that, right? What if there was a way of downloading all of your thoughts and all of your memories and all of your feelings and somehow re-uploading them into another body or into a robot, whatever it might be? So you're now encountering another individual who has got exactly the same thoughts, exactly the same memories, exactly the same feelings, whatever it might be. Are we now going to think that that person is you? So the chances are we're probably not, because something within us tells us that I am me. It's very difficult to define who I am. I'm clearly more than my heart, because if my heart was changed for someone else's heart, I wouldn't wake up and think that I'm a completely different person, right? And if someone, God forbid, suffered brain damage, we're not going to say that they are not that person anymore because they can't use their brain in the same way. We're not going to say that if the memories could go into something else, that person is now you and you are not you. So it's clearly, we are clearly deeper and more complex than just the physical body as we see it. If a person loses a hand, they're not any less of a person. They're not any less them. And even something as drastic as a person having suffering from brain damage, we would never say that this is not that person anymore. They might not be able to do the same things, but they're not a different person. Go on, Martin.
If I could interrupt, one of the problems they're really worried about with brain surgery is if they can transplant the brain, what actually happens. However, you do often hear people say, and I've come across it many times at Nightingale, that isn't them. The person I'm dealing with now is not my father's, not my mother, because the brain has changed so dramatically that the person isn't the person they knew.
So what I'm saying is not in contradiction to that. I'm not saying that they are not behaving differently, but I would imagine that somebody who is faced with an individual who is not behaving in the way that they ever did before, no one's going to say, well, I'm just completely detached from that person now.
No,
so that's more the point that I'm trying to get at. They don't become a new person. They don't have a different identity. It's a big challenge for someone to live in such a situation, but we would never say that that person is not their mother anymore.
No, but they do say it's not the same person.
Correct.
Sorry. I mean, yeah.
But when we ask the question of who am I, right, and some of us point at our hearts and some of us point at our heads, right, we can appreciate that the answer there is a lot of depth to this answer that doesn't necessarily get addressed just from a purely scientific, biological way of examining the question. It's clearly more complex than that, because if we say, well, you know, I am my heart, well, if your heart was in another body, you're not going to feel, you know, a person's existence doesn't continue into another person from a heart transplant, and the person who has the new heart doesn't all of a sudden feel like they are that person. So it's more complex. And what's interesting is that in this Mishnah, what we're seeing is 3 questions. Where do you come from? Where are you going? And to whom are you going to have to give a reckoning to? And then the answers are kind of like, well, they're basically addressing the physical body, aren't they? You know, who am I? Am I really just a putrid drop that came from an encounter? You know, 1 in a billion chance that putrid drop, so to speak, became me, right? So one of the ways that this gets examined is that actually the questions are talking to the soul and the answers are talking to the body, which is important to understand generally, right? Who are we? We are a composite of a body and a soul. In Jewish belief, we have a part of us that will exist beyond a physical death. Our bodies will decompose, our bodies will go into the ground, but there will be a part of us that lives on. There will be and it's that part that we just can't get our heads around. We just can't understand what that really means. But we get a taste of it when we start to consider who we are. There is something going on in our presence and the fact that we are here that we can't point to. Yeah, we can't quite identify who we are, and that's because there is a spiritual component to us as well. And that spiritual component, as Claudia was saying, is the Tselem Elokim. It's that divine spark. It's that piece of Hashem, so to speak, that exists within each and every single one of us. And so that could help us have a look at this Mishnah in a bit of a different light. Not only do we now have to look at this Mishnah and wonder to ourselves, why does it seem to be speaking so harshly? And why does it seem to be speaking in a way that is almost deflating and demotivating? Who are you? You're nothing, mate. You're just you're nothing. Right? That is one way of looking at it, but there are other ways of looking at it as well. Let's think about this for just a second. We ask the question, where do you come from? And the answer that we get is a tipas rucha, which we translate as a putrid drop. But there is one thing that that I learned once, which is also fascinating for us to get our heads around. All right, if we consider what the probability is of 2 people meeting, right, in a world of 6-7 billion people. I appreciate in the Jewish community the numbers are staggeringly smaller than that, But nonetheless, even within the Jewish community, let's say there's 15 million people worldwide, you know, the chances of two people meeting and having a union, and in the process of that union, the man contributes somewhere in the region of billions, isn't it, or millions of sperm, and that one of those millions and billions of sperm manage to interact with the egg inside of the woman, and that manages to fertilize, and then a baby, that human being is formed out of that very, very staggeringly small percentage chance, right? So actually, you could look at it and say, what are you? You're nothing, mate, right? Look, consider what you are. On the other hand, you can consider it as what an amazingly, staggeringly small chance there was of you as a physical body ever existing. I can't remember who said it, but someone said the day that you were born was the day on which Hashem decided that the world couldn't exist without you in it.
It's lovely.
Isn't that lovely? The day that you were born was the day that Hashem decided that you couldn't exist, the world couldn't exist without you in it. So I would say that spin on this tipas rucha is completely different. It's in some way it's supposed to build us. It's supposed to realize just how amazing it is, the fact that we are here. If we consider the process of childbirth, you know, now it's such a sterile environment, and the risks are so much smaller from a medical point of view by people being able to go to hospitals and such. But once upon a time, it was very real for people to see the miracle of childbirth, because the mother's life was literally on the line, right? In Judaism, in the in philosophy, it talks a lot about how the moment of birth is the darkest point of a woman's life. You know, the pain threshold is not going to get any stronger than that. The point at which a baby is born is at the exact same point that the woman's life is most at risk. The pain is the most acute. The dangers are most apparent. You're literally pushing a human being out of your body, and anything could happen and anything could go wrong. And once upon a time, right, it really did. It was extremely frightening and extremely scary, and it still is. But you know, we're blessed to live at a time where the medicine and the provisions around us can really, really help with the procedure. You know, cesarean deliveries in a sterile environment would be completely different if, God forbid, it was at a time before all of these procedures. So, oh gosh, I think I'm about to take a delivery. Talking of deliveries, there's someone coming to my door. No, okay, he's going away. Look at that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So is it referring to a putrid drop as a sperm?
Yes, that's the way in which this will often get interpreted.
So,
Yeah.
so the big question is, why is it described as putrid?
Because it can decay. Because if it didn't happen in the close proximity to the event, then it's just going to go to waste, and it's never going to fertilize.
It doesn't make sense. It's saying where you come from. If the drop was putrid, you wouldn't exist. So that doesn't really.
But I think what it's saying is that you come from a drop which has the capacity to putrefy, to decay, to so it might not be saying that you come from one that has already putrefied, but it's if we think about it conceptually, we're talking about a physical process which has the capacity to be completely wasted. If we think as well about the actual act that we're talking about, one of the other things to consider is that the process in which it happens, the union between two people, right? So the act itself is one that is almost entirely encapsulated by passion and by desire. When two people are together, there's very little else that is going on at the time. And when we consider the scenario, right? Now we're on the internet. We've got to be careful. We've got to keep it clean. But the act can either be immoral or it can be holy, depending on the people who are involved. And so that in itself is trying to indicate to us that our lives can be one of purpose, of accomplishment, of spiritual growth, goodness, holiness, sanctity, nobility, or it can be a life of selfishness, of evil, of violence, of harm. And so the act that this Mishnah is trying to get us to contemplate and to think about, and don't forget we said histakel bishlosha dvarim, look at three things, not just look with your eyes, ro'eh, but histakel. If you're in Hebrew, if you are mistakel, so then you're looking at this, you're contemplating it, you're analyzing it, you are reflecting on it. That's what's being encouraged over here. So we're being encouraged to reflect on where we have come from. We have come from a union between two people that could have been immoral or it could have been holy. So too our lives can be led in an immoral way or in a holy way. It comes from a very chance encounter. Even if the two individuals have devoted themselves completely and entirely to each other, the probability nonetheless of biologically everything happening is still very, very remote. Right? Now, of course, beyond that, we've got the whole concept of who we are, a soul sent down from Shamayim, a piece of Elohim, a piece of Hashem, whatever all of that means. And then we're being put into the world, and we're being put into the body. So there's a lot to contemplate. Can't necessarily do it all in 1 hour. But yeah, Josephine, I keep ignoring you, but yes, you are wrong. Go for it.
I was going to say that I have been taught that the soul joins the body at the point of conception. And what we just know is that soul's journey before it joins the body.
Mm-hmm.
The soul has a journey of its own.
That's very true.
So,
but very mystical, Joe. For plain folk like me, I don't know what to do with that.
It's important to say that the person's life is not dependent on whether the act was immoral or not.
Correct.
That some very wonderful people have come from backgrounds that one wouldn't wish to have.
100%.
Yeah, this is very similar to the first pasuk in the second chapter, isn't it? In a way,
it is.
It's a really similar concept. You just know that all your deeds are going to be added up, and you're going to have to answer for them at the end. If I remember rightly, the first pasuk in this chapter 2 is identical. Well, not identical, but it's very, very similar.
Yeah. So in chapter 2, Mishnah 1, we had Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, who said, "Histakel again, b'shlosha dvarim." Look at three things. Ve'ein ata ba lidei aveira, and you will not come into the grip of sin. Da ma lemala mimcha. Know what is above you. A watchful eye, an attentive ear, and all your deeds are recorded in a book. They are very similar, but this is coming with his.
It's just in a much more graphic, this is a more human, graphic way. The other was more esoterical.
No, can you hear me?
Yeah, of course.
Can I share something on this that
Please.
I'm going to try and remember? I'm trying to remember it though, if I get it right. The Lubavitcher Rebbe comments about, if that's all right to talk about.
Absolutely.
In the Tanya, which is a text written by the first Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe.
Yeah.
They talk about there being three types of people. There's Sadiqin, and there's sinners. So there's righteous people, sinners, and then the intermediaries. And they say the intermediaries are very observant. They keep all the rules and everything, but they're maybe not quite on the spiritual level that a Sadiq is. And he says that in this statement, there's actually three different comments. There's the first one, which is that says, mark well three things and you will not come unto the power of sin. The next one is about know where you come from, where you're going, and where, and so forth. And the next one is about the putrid drop and where you're going, and so forth. And the Rebbe says that that really it's the same comment, but it's being said in three different ways to three different types of people. So for a sinner, you need to be more direct and actually say, where do you come from, a putrid drop? Where are you going? A place of dust. To try and get the message across, you need to be more direct and physical in a physical way. And for the intermediary, know where you come from, know where you're going. He needs a reminder of where he's going, because he needs to get to that spiritual level. He doesn't need to be reminded that you're going to do transgressions that will go wrong, because he physically doesn't do them wrong. He's just not on that spiritual level. But when the first comment, mark the three things that is just a reminder to a Sadiq, not that he's going to do anything wrong, God forbid, but just to remember to keep sort of growing to a higher level.
Interesting. Is it fair to say, though, that each and every person could go through moments in their life where they might be on any of those three stages at any point in their lives? There are some...
I don't know about the Sadiq, but yeah.
No, but because
sure.
Because I'm thinking more in the sense that there will be times in our lives where we only need the smallest reminder to get ourselves realigned, and sometimes we need a more hard-hitting message. And generally, I was thinking about this as well, in the way in which we educate our children. Sometimes when our children are needing some kind of correction, so sometimes we just need to say to them, like, just remember where you come from. You're a Ket, and we're better than this, type thing. Or you're a hammerman, or you're a wizard, Harry, right? Whatever it is. Sometimes it's necessary to say and to educate in a way of, like, look at where you come from, and look at where you're going. If you want to be a doctor one day, the behavior that you're doing now, you're not going to get there. If you're not working in school, you're not going to get there. If you want this name for yourself, whatever it is, one day, or this achievement or this accolade, then get yourself back on track. And ultimately, the question of who you are accountable to. Now, on the one hand, the Mishnah tells us we're accountable to Hashem, and on the other hand, when we're talking to our children, we often use the words of, like, it's your own time you're wasting. We're going to have to answer to ourselves, not just Hashem, but we have to answer to ourselves as well. So I saw that in these words as well. Go on, Rita.
Is procreation the biggest mitzvah?
Is procreation the biggest mitzvah? It's certainly a very big mitzvah. It's the first mitzvah that we get from the Torah, Peru Uruvu, and it's one of the mitzvot in the Torah that certainly has the capacity for greatest holiness and for greatest corruption, or greatest what's the word that I'm looking for? Greatest way of getting it wrong. It's supposed to be a very, very private matter between two people, and you don't usually see that with most of the mitzvot that we do. It's the one. Can I say it's one of the only mitzvot? It's probably one of the only mitzvot that no one should ever know you have done. Granted, the result certainly indicates it, but but we see when it comes to the act itself, we're very, very sensitive as to how that gets talked about. You know, there's a statement in the Talmud that says one has to be very careful when it comes to weddings and a husband and wife. The Gemara understands that we all know what they're going to do eventually, but we never talk about it, right? So when I say we never talk about it, I mean as a society, we're not supposed to talk about other people's business, right? We have to be careful as to what we hint to and what we insinuate and all those kinds of things, because it's a very delicate, sensitive matter. Not for sharing, but Dad, do you still remember what you said when when Shira and I let you guys know that we were expecting Miri? Don't answer on the chat. I'm just wondering if you remember. I'll talk to you after. Anyway, so
I think Jamie, if I remember rightly, when I was discussing this with Rabbi Dubov in Wimbledon, Lubavitch, he said the rabbi was suggesting that through our lives, most of us go through all those three stages.
Yeah.
There are times in most people's lives when they could be, and they are at tzaddik, when they're just the person who has doubts or beliefs, and the wicked person. That all of us go through possibly these three stages at some time. Or
I would say that a person could go through all three stages in the space of one day.
Yeah.
Why not?
Why not? Sometimes a thought comes into your mind and you know you shouldn't have it, and if you're clever enough or you have the ability, you block it out. And sometimes you have great belief, and sometimes things happen and you think, my goodness me, why?
You know, we've said it before, but Judaism, to live as a Jew, basically means to live in a state of mindfulness, of paying attention, right? And the decisions that we encounter in the courses of our day, if we're paying attention, then we will make the right decision. And if we're not paying attention, then that depends on our instinct, right? Our instinct will either take us in the right direction or the wrong direction. So it's all about paying attention. It's all about histakel. It's all about working to a point where we are always thinking to ourselves about the repercussions of our decisions, the results of our actions, and it's a day by day constant effort to be able to do it. We mentioned before the questions seem to talk to our soul. The answers seem to talk to our body. We ask, who are we really? You know, there's another level to this, which is if all we are is just a putrid drop, and one day we're just going to decompose and decay in the ground, then there's a question of why would we invest, or why would we make decisions that invest in our bodies? Because our bodies are insignificant, but it's our souls that are the nobility. It's our souls that are these lofty components to ourselves. And so there's another contemplation here of challenging ourselves to invest in our souls and not just to invest in our bodies. But you know, it's hard to do that. Everybody that I've seen commenting on this mentions this fact, you know. When we reflect on these things, it gives our life meaning, but it's so hard to actually put that into practice day by day. Rabbi Weinberg, Noach Weinberg, who was the head of Aish, said, people will always know what they would die for, but how many people would know what they would live for? Yeah, so we can all have the point at which we would give up our lives for meaning, for clarity, for our religion, whatever it might be, but we also have an imperative to live for those values as well, not just to die for them. But it's very, very hard, and that is why the Mishnah says to look at these three things, think about them, be mindful, concentrate during your day. You will not come to the hands, to lidei avera, to the hands of sin, and that's because right? In Jewish philosophy, in the Talmud, we always talk about sin as getting their grips. They're like hands that grip onto you and they don't want to let go. Our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, which is also a part of us, by the way, is actively trying to hold on to us. It's actively trying to pull us down. It's always, you know, that side of us is always looking for the attractive, alluring distractions that can pull us away. The Gemara talks about, the Talmud talks about how it says the following words. It says that a person who sins 2 or 3 times, it becomes permitted. To which the Gemara asks, sorry, excuse me? If I do a sin 2 or 3 times, what? So now I'm allowed to do it? What does that mean? That I can, if I go to McDonald's once, that's a problem. If I go to McDonald's twice, that's a problem. If I go to McDonald's 3 times, well, hey, Torah lets me do it now. God lets me do it now. That's what the Gemara asks. Doesn't use McDonald's as an example there. Right? To which the Gemara answers, no, okay, it doesn't mean that it becomes permitted, but it means that a person's mind, if you go far down, if you go far along that path enough, in your brain, it no longer becomes a decision. It no longer becomes a challenge. It no longer becomes a question. Should I be doing this? Shouldn't I be doing this? The more you do it, the more it's ingrained and habitual, the less of an issue it becomes. In your head, it's permitted. And if we reflect on that, if we think on that, we can see that that is a true statement. That is a true sentiment. If we do the wrong thing often enough, we begin to accept it as part of ourselves. We're unable to change. Take me for who I am. This is who I am. You're wrong. I'm right. We'll come up with justifications as to why it's okay. We'll come up with all of the excuses under the sun as to why it's okay. It's not that bad. It's bad for that person. It's not bad for me. As long as I'm a good person, as long as I'm doing this, as long as I'm doing that. You know, we'll come up with all of these justifications, but if we take our minds out of the equation for a minute, we are gripped and we are seized by something that has now become a part of us that we will find it very difficult to shake off. So that's perhaps one of the things that I would say to that. We're running out of time, so let's just see what we can add in.
You one question.
Yeah, please.
He says, then he goes on to a place of dust, of worm, and of a maggot. Does he remind us at the end that whatever you do, you're still going into dust and be eaten by worms and so on?
So this links into what I was saying before, that if we're investing only in our bodies, right? If we're investing only in physical pleasures, hedonistic, narcissistic behaviors, then at the end of that, what are you taking with you? Right? There's a famous story, you've probably heard it before, of one of the Rothschilds who passes away, phenomenally wealthy guy, and his children open up a letter that is given to them at the moment that he passes away, and it says along the lines of, I really, really want to be buried in my favorite pair of socks. Yeah? So they go to the rabbi and they say, listen, our father has insisted that he gets buried in his favorite pair of socks. To which the rabbi says, well, I'm terribly sorry. We don't have a uniform like that for burial. Sorry, we have a uniform for burial, and it doesn't include socks. All right? He is going to be buried in shrouds. He is going to be buried in a coffin or not a coffin, depending on whatever the custom was where he was. Right? There's one way, one size fits all when it comes to burial. He can't be buried in his pair of socks. Jewish custom, Jewish law does not permit it. Well, don't you know who he was? He was this fabulously wealthy guy. He gave so much money and philanthropy and all the rest of it. How can you disgrace such a man? I'm terribly sorry. If you want your father to be buried in accordance with Jewish custom, he can't be buried with his favorite pair of socks. So eventually they relent. Eventually they give in. Mr/Baron, whatever Rothschild, whichever Rothschild this was about, gets buried, and then afterwards they are given a second letter, right? The letter to be opened after his burial. And they read it and they say, By now, you will have realized that I can't even take my favorite pair of socks to the grave. Right?
Yeah.
When we pass from this world, we're not going to be taking anything physical with us. And specifically, the mission is reminding us there's not going to be anything that remains of us. There is, because we have a tradition that there's one bone that will never decompose, and the righteous individuals have never decomposed in their graves. But nonetheless, we understand the concept that we can't take anything with us. Right? What we want to accomplish, the legacy that we want to leave behind, right? The name that we leave for ourselves, these are not physical things. These are done through our deeds, and it's our mitzvahs that we're going to take with us when we leave this world. And it's the reward for our mitzvahs that we're going to be given when we leave this world. So that's something else that comes out of this whole thing. We talked before about enormous choices, right? The act is one that can be done in one of two ways, a holy way or a very unholy way. Our lives can be very holy or very unholy, right? So there's a brilliant comment to this effect, right? The guy, a husband and wife go and visit their rabbi. I used this in one of my sermons once, so if you're paying attention then, you've heard it before. But I heard this from Rabbi Jacobson in New York. He said there's a husband and a wife who go to visit their rabbi, and they say, we've just had a baby and we need to come up with a name for him. So the rabbi says, okay, so what are the options? So the mother says, well, I want to name him Moshe after my father, okay? And he wants to name our child Moshe after his father. Well, what's the problem then, he says? Just name the child Moshe. He says, no, you don't understand. I want to name him after my father, the wife says. My father, he was an amazing guy. He was a big philanthropist. He was considerate. He was kind. He was an excellent father. He had excellent midas. He was a superb, outstanding individual, very popular. That's why I want to name him after my father. His father, he was a degenerate, a lowlife. He was terrible. He was disgusting. He was immoral. He was vulgar. I don't want to name him after his father. So the rabbi says, okay, give me a minute here. Go outside of my room. Give me some time to think about this. So they go out of the room. He calls them back in afterwards, and he's sitting there stroking his beard, and he says, okay, I've decided. You should call the baby Moshe. So the mother says, but after who? After my father or his father? So the rabbi says, we'll let the boy decide.
Oh, very, very good.
Right?
Very, very good.
Ultimately, it's going to be up to us as to who decides whether we are going to live a life of meaning, of growth, or, God forbid, the opposite. Right? La'anata holech, to where are we going? Okay, the realization of mortality is supposed to propel us, to motivate us to want to live a meaningful life, right? I work best under a deadline. If I know that I've got a certain point at which I need to get a piece of work done by, I'll work really hard constantly to make sure that it's done in that time. If we're not really conscious of any deadline, if we don't really appreciate that there's a level of urgency to our actions, then we can just be very wasteful and very unproductive. So the contemplation, the histakel of understanding that there is an end point, there's a moment at which we are going to be held accountable, right? Then we're going to understand that every moment of our lives can be laden with meaning and laden with importance. And it's a lifetime of reflection and of mindfulness and of concentration that gets us to a point where we can align our actions with what we think and what we reflect on as well. One interesting that I remember hearing, by the way, is that turning to the end of our Mishnah, which talks about Lifnei mi ata atid litain din v'cheshbon. Who are we going to have to give din v'cheshbon to? Right? Who are we going to be ultimately accountable to? And it says to the King of Kings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem. Right? So one interesting thing that I once heard on this, and I'm trying to remember the context and who I heard it from, but I can't. But he said like this, he said, we're going to be shown a list of things that a person has done. Yeah? We're going to be shown that this guy did, he ate what he ate, he did what he did, and we're going to say, what do you think of this? What do you think of this person? Oh, here. Look at all the bad decisions he made. That, what a terrible thing that this person has done. That's terrible what this guy did. These bad decisions he should be held accountable for. Yeah, and then one day we're going to be shown our video, right, of our lives, and the decision will already be made. We'll have locked in. We'll have already said that these actions were bad. So why should you be held to any different type of standard, any different type of level than how you judged that other person? You might be familiar with the concept of midah keneged midah, that we are going to be judged in the same proportions and the same measures to which we judged other people. Right? The way that we treated others is the way that we will get treated. It will come back to haunt us. Right? If we were overly critical, if we were overly judgmental of a person for their actions, then if we ever made those same mistakes on our level, then we're going to be held to the same standard and the same level of critique and criticism that we were holding others to. So there's that level of angle of caution as well, which is like, who are we going to be ultimately accountable to? We're going to be accountable to Hashem, but He's going to hold us to account pretty much in the same way that He held others to account, which is why we have concepts in Judaism like dan l'chav zchut, to judge people favorably, to reflect deeply and meaningfully on how we perceive the actions of others, because one day we could be held to the same exacting standards that we were holding others to. So there's a lot going on in this mission, so much more that we could say, but that's it for the recording. If you want to join us for the after party, quickly get yourselves onto Zoom, but we are going to end the broadcast for today. Thank you all for joining us. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful day, wonderful, meaningful life, and Shabbat Shalom for when it comes. Take care.